Ladies, y'all can call me Love, okay? Fellas, y'all may prefer Brother Love.
So Ja Rule is losing it right now, and not just because 50 Cent checked Diddy in his new Netflix doc. He's raging because 50 allegedly leaked something far worse, a secret freak-off tape linking Ja Rule and Diddy. The moment 50's docu-series dropped, Ja Rule went nuclear online, calling 50 a snitch, a rat, an abuser, anything he could throw to distract from the real problem. Because according to insiders, 50 didn't just expose Diddy, he exposed Ja too, and that's got him standing in the middle of a career-ending scandal.
Compulsive liar.
It all started with 50 dropping his Netflix docu-series, Sean Combs, The Wreck-It. Now 50 went all out, securing his hands on never-before-seen footage of Combs and testimonies from Diddy's inner circle.
The exclusive video obtained by Netflix shows Combs debating with his lawyers about strategy.
Listen to me. I'm gonna get off the phone right now, and I am going to let your professionals look at the situation and come back to me with a solution.
I feel like I need to watch. Like I'm dirt. It's showing you his character.
Most fans love 50 for checking Diddy like that. But Ja Rule, he wasn't happy. Instead, he was pissed. And he made sure to let 50 and the internet know all about it on social media. For starters, he called 50 a snitch, saying, "N-man always telling on somebody. Old dry snitch-ass N-man. You rat, always have been, always will be a rat. Used car salesman suit wearing, field goal nose having, Herman Munster head N-word." In another tweet, he questioned 50's motives for making the documentary in the first place. Let's be real, that N-man D-gaff about the victims, we all know why he did the doc. Herman's a cancer to the culture. If he cares so much, then donate the profits to charities for domestic violence. Even after all that, Ja still wasn't done. For his next move, he dug up 50's violent past, writing, "Herman's no different, allegedly," along with a news article talking about how 50 attacked his baby mama, Daphne Joy, in 2013. He also called out the public's double standard. "It's cool when he do it. It's a problem when I do it. Bah, Herman an abuser too, allegedly." Interestingly, Ja Rule's not the only one with his panties in a bunch over the docu-series. Diddy wasn't a huge fan of having his personal footage stolen for views either. He had his team release this statement to discredit the documentary. Netflix is plainly desperate to sensationalize every minute of Mr. Combs' life without regard for truth in order to capitalize on a never-ending media frenzy. If Netflix cared about truth or about Mr. Combs' legal rights, it would not be ripping private footage out of context, including conversations with his lawyers that were never intended for public viewing. Apparently, he also tried to have the entire thing pulled from Netflix right before its release. Now, Diddy trying to get the footage removed makes a lot of sense, but Ja Rule, his reaction seems a little out of the pocket to fans, and they've been checking him for it.
Very much giving me the family that likes to protect that weird uncle instead of protecting the people who he's harming. Ja Rule took to the internet to say this about 50 Cent, calling him a snitch. I just think it's weird that you feel like this is snitching. It's like y'all do know that if he didn't do these horrible things, that there would be nothing to talk about. And this is what I'm saying. It very much is given that a lot of y'all was at the Diddy parties doing what the Diddy Diddler was doing, and now y'all are upset because it's all coming out.
But of course, Ja's been defensive, telling fans that he's not condoning Diddy's behavior, only highlighting 50's hypocrisy. But newsflash, no one's buying it. Fans suspect something else. And here's the kicker, everyone might be on the right track. According to sources close to Ja, he's actually losing it because there's an industry-shattering freak-off tape going around starring him and Diddy. Yeah, turns out Ja was one of Diddy's boy toys, and 50's got the receipts. So Ja's crash out over the documentary, it's actually because he's going crazy worrying about 50's gonna release next. And no, it's not exactly the craziest allegation out there, because Diddy's right-hand man, Gene Deal, spilled the tea about Ja and Diddy going at it in the bedroom a long time ago. He once saw Diddy buy plugs from a store.
At one point, he picked up some things from up here on my left side, and then he picked like quite a few of them down. I'm like, okay. He put them in the bag. So when I went by there and I looked up there, and it said hot plug, and I was like, hey yo.
Later, he brought the plugs over to a hotel room he was sharing with a man and a girl on the same day.
This rapper and him, they all in the room together. You know, it's Sarah, the girl, Puff, and this dude, this rapper.
Gene left the three alone to do their business until a man claiming to be the rapper's cousin showed up. He tried to enter the room, and that's when Gene had to show him his place. Obviously, there was a commotion, and guess who popped out of the room? It was none other than Ja Rule with Diddy in a towel.
Puff and Ja Rule runs out the room. Puff got his towel, Ja grabbing his towel, but they butt the neck. And so then Ja was like, yo, what's going on? Yo, Gene, that's my cousin. He know me well. And Puff was like, yo, Gene, what happened?
But how do people know Gene's standing on business and not spinning stories for the spotlight? Well, this is where Ja Rule's wife comes in. A couple of years ago, Aisha Atkin actually exposed Ja for leaving her for a man. Homegirl left nothing back when she sat down for her interview with MTV. We spent 10 plus years building our marriage, but it only took him 2 to decide he'd rather suck a bleep than be with his wife. Sounds mean, but Atkin had every reason to be mad. Her husband was sentenced to 2 years in jail for a gun charge and released in 2013. But instead of running back into the arms of his wife, he jumped into bed with his cellmate. He returned home all right to get his shit and leave, is what Aisha said. Now that's a betrayal that Aisha couldn't bury. But how does that tie into Ja's current situation? Well, fans think if he was willing to get into bed with his cellmate, he probably bent over for Diddy too. That could explain the sympathies Ja had for Diddy when he got locked up.
Diddy Coombs. What's your take on what's happening with him?
You know, it's another black man in this industry going through some unfortunate, circumstances. And so, I wish him luck as well with everything he's doing.
Honestly, between Ja blasting 50 for exposing Diddy and him sympathizing with the music mogul, fans are fully convinced the two of them had something going on. One person wrote, "He def took you shopping." Meanwhile, another person wrote, "Ja Rule, we get that you don't like 50 Cent, but you still haven't explained why you and Diddy were in the same room in your towels with baby oil, plugs, and Lord knows what else." As for whether 50's got the right to call out Diddy and Ja, well, most fans think it's not about that.
And I keep seeing a lot of people say that 50 Cent is Diddy in a different font. And listen, I'm not here to say that 50 Cent is the best person in the world. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if 50 Cent were really that bad, someone would go ahead and produce a documentary like the one he produced about Diddy.
And that's why, at the end of the day, Ja Rule can call 50 every name in the book, but the internet isn't buying it. It's clear that he's terrified that 50's doc is only the beginning. Because if 50 really does have that freak-off tape with Diddy,
Let me say this
Ja's not just defending Diddy, he's defending himself. The only question is Ja ready to share a prison cell with Diddy?
This is not about bedroom behavior, preferences, or scandal the way the internet reduces it. This is about power, control, and how certain industries strip men of their authority by breaking their internal sense of dominance and autonomy. What we are watching play out right now is not a freak situation or a random meltdown. It is the visible collapse of a system that has relied on silence, leverage, and humiliation for decades, and once you understand that, the emotional reactions start making sense in a way gossip never could. Men are not controlled in this industry the same way women are. Women are often pressured through beauty, visibility, desirability, and approval. Men are controlled through ego, legacy, and identity. The fastest way to neutralize a powerful man is not to take his money or his platform first. It is to compromise the way he sees himself. Once a man feels internally fractured, once his sense of self is no longer solid, he becomes manageable. He becomes reactive instead of strategic. He becomes defensive instead of decisive. That is not accidental. That is design. This is why humiliation is such a recurring theme when these stories finally surface. Not humiliation for entertainment, but humiliation as a control mechanism. When a man believes that his reputation, his image, or his private history can be weaponized against him at any moment, he becomes cautious in ways the public never sees. He stops challenging authority, he stops speaking freely, he stops protecting others, he starts protecting himself, and that shift is exactly what the system wants. Silence is not always bought with money. Sometimes it is bought with fear of exposure. What people fail to grasp is that many of these men did not walk into these environments fully informed or fully empowered. Some were young. Some were desperate for opportunity. Some were surrounded by mentors who framed exploitation as loyalty, initiation, or the cost of doing business. Once a man crosses a line he never intended to cross, even symbolically, that moment becomes leverage. From that point forward, the relationship is no longer equal. It is not mentorship, it is ownership. And ownership does not require constant enforcement. when the subject enforces it on himself. That is why reactions like Ja Rule's are not just anger or rivalry, they are panic responses. When you see a man spiral publicly, throwing accusations in every direction, attacking character instead of facts, you are not watching confidence. You are watching containment failure. You are watching someone who knows that the narrative protecting him is cracking, and once it cracks, he loses not just reputation, but control over his own story. Men fear that loss more than almost anything, because identity is currency in this business. This also explains why certain figures are protected for years, while others are sacrificed quickly. Protection is not always about innocence or guilt. It is about who holds leverage over whom. If a man has participated in or witnessed things that implicate others higher up the chain, he becomes both dangerous and valuable. Dangerous if he speaks, valuable if he stays quiet. That is when silence becomes negotiated, not requested. That is when careers are preserved in exchange for obedience, not talent. Another uncomfortable truth is that masculinity itself becomes the battleground. When a man's sense of manhood is attacked or destabilized, especially in ways that conflict with his public image, the psychological impact is severe. He becomes easier to guide, easier to isolate, easier to manipulate. This is not about sexuality, this is about power inversion. It is about taking a man who sees himself as dominant and placing him in a position where he feels exposed, compromised, or subordinate. Once that internal shift happens, he may still appear powerful externally, but internally he is negotiating fear every day. That fear is what keeps systems intact long after the public thinks they should collapse. It is why certain people defend the indefensible. It is why outrage sometimes looks misplaced. It is why men who should be standing with victims instead stand with abusers. Loyalty in these cases is not moral. It is strategic. It is survival. It is a calculation made by men who know that if one truth comes out, it does not come out alone. The industry thrives on this kind of fragmentation because fragmented men do not organize. They do not unite. They do not challenge the structure. They compete with each other instead, tearing down rivals while the system watches safely from above. Public feuds become distractions. Social media outrage becomes noise. Meanwhile, the underlying architecture of control remains untouched. When people say this feels ritualistic, they are not wrong, even if they lack the language to explain it. Ritual does not always mean ceremony. Sometimes ritual is repetition. Sometimes ritual is humiliation. Sometimes ritual is forcing someone to participate in something that contradicts their self-image so thoroughly that they never feel whole again. That psychological break is not random, it is intentional, and it is incredibly effective. This is why certain men age differently in the industry. You see it in their eyes, their speech, their posture. Some look like survivors. Others look like men who have been carrying a secret weight for decades. The ones carrying that weight react the loudest when exposure threatens the system, because exposure does not just threaten one person. It threatens the entire web of silence. And that is where the conspiracy angle becomes unavoidable, not as fantasy, but as structure. When too many reactions align, when too many defenses sound identical, when outrage is directed at the messenger instead of the message, it tells you the pressure is being felt behind the scenes. Men do not react this way over gossip. They react this way over leverage. So when you hear a man suddenly framing himself as a moral authority, accusing others of hypocrisy, or deflecting toward unrelated past behavior, understand what you are seeing. You are watching someone try to regain narrative control before control is taken from him entirely. You are watching a man protect not just his image, but the agreements that image has kept hidden for years. This is not about one tape, one documentary, or one feud. This is about an industry that has long relied on psychological dominance rather than transparency. And the moment that dominance starts slipping, everything gets louder, uglier, and more desperate. Men who were once calm become erratic. Men who once avoided attention suddenly crave it. That is not strength. That is fear dressed as bravado. And the reason this moment feels different is because control only works as long as people believe it is absolute. Once men realize that silence is no longer protecting them, that exposure is inevitable, the system begins to eat itself. Allies turn into liabilities. Loyalty fractures. And the truth, even when partial, becomes dangerous enough to change everything. That is what we are witnessing right now. Not scandal, not shock, not gossip. We are watching a power structure crack, and the men who built their lives inside that structure are scrambling to decide whether they will go down defending it or survive by finally telling the truth. And history shows us, very clearly, that systems built on humiliation always collapse the moment shame loses its power. There is a reason men in this industry stay quiet long after they should have spoken, and it has nothing to do with loyalty or friendship the way people like to romanticize it. Silence is not always about protecting someone else. More often, silence is about protecting the version of yourself that the world believes in, because once that version collapses, everything you built on top of it collapses too. For men whose identity, authority, and relevance are tied to perception, exposure feels like a kind of social death that is worse than losing money, status, or even freedom. That fear is not accidental. It is cultivated. Blackmail does not always look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like an unspoken understanding that certain doors remain open as long as certain truths stay buried. A man does not need to be reminded daily of what exists in a vault, on a hard drive, or in someone else's memory. He remembers it every time he considers speaking out of turn. He remembers it when he weighs whether to defend a victim or defend a system. He remembers it when his conscience tells him one thing and his survival instinct tells him another. That internal conflict is the true prison, and it is one that no cell can replicate. Masculinity is the pressure point, because masculinity is how men are socialized to measure their worth. When a man's sense of dominance, autonomy, or control is compromised, especially in a way that contradicts his public image, it creates a fracture that never fully heals. Even if no one else knows, he knows. And once a man feels internally diminished, he becomes easier to manage, easier to intimidate, and easier to silence. That is why humiliation, especially private humiliation, is such an effective tool of control. It strips power without ever touching the surface. What people misunderstand is that many men who appear powerful are negotiating shame every single day. They are not confident. They are contained. They are not loyal. They are afraid. They are not calm. They are constantly calculating whether today is the day something leaks, resurfaces, or gets reframed. When you see men aggressively attacking whistleblowers, journalists, or rivals who speak too freely, you are often witnessing projection. They are fighting the possibility that someone else's courage will expose their own fear. This dynamic explains why silence spreads so efficiently in environments built on hierarchy. Once one man is compromised, his silence reinforces the silence of others. Each person knows that if one thread is pulled, the entire fabric could unravel. That mutual vulnerability creates a perverse form of stability, where everyone protects the system not because they believe in it, but because they are all trapped inside it together. It is not loyalty. It is mutual exposure. The loss of manhood in this context is not about sexual acts or rumors. It is about agency. It is about the moment a man realizes he no longer controls the narrative of his own life. That realization reshapes how he moves through the world. He may still posture as confident, aggressive, or untouchable, but underneath that performance is someone who understands that his power is conditional. Conditional power is fragile power, and fragile power produces desperate behavior when threatened. This is why moments of public exposure feel so volatile. When even a fraction of the truth leaks out, it destabilizes not just individuals, but the agreements that have kept people quiet for years. A man who has built his life on silence does not respond calmly to the possibility of exposure. He responds emotionally, erratically, and sometimes violently in language if not in action. That response is not strength. It is panic. The industry depends on this panic because it discourages others from speaking. When younger men watch what happens to those who step out of line, they learn the lesson without it ever being formally taught. They see reputations dismantled, alliances withdrawn, opportunities vanish. Fear becomes inherited knowledge. Silence becomes a career strategy. And the cycle continues without anyone ever needing to say the word blackmail out loud. What makes this moment different is that silence is losing its value. The old calculations no longer hold the same weight. Men who once believed that staying quiet guaranteed safety are realizing that silence only delays the reckoning. It does not prevent it. And that realization is destabilizing to a system that has relied on quiet compliance for decades. When fear stops working, control starts slipping. This is the deeper reason these reactions feel so intense and so personal. They are not about rivalry, gossip, or old grudges. They are about men confronting the possibility that the very thing they thought protected them is now what endangers them. When silence turns from shield to liability, the psychological collapse can be sudden and public. In the end, the cost of keeping your manhood in an industry like this is not paid once. It is paid daily, through anxiety, through self-betrayal, through defending people you know are wrong, and through watching injustice unfold while telling yourself it is not your place to intervene. That cost accumulates until something breaks. Sometimes what breaks is the man. Sometimes what breaks is the system. And sometimes, finally, what breaks is the silence itself. That is where we are now. Not at the beginning of exposure, but at the point where silence is no longer sustainable. When men start choosing between telling the truth and preserving a version of themselves that no longer exists, the industry does not change quietly. It fractures loudly, defensively, and without dignity. And the men who survive are not the ones who stayed silent the longest, but the ones who understood, just in time, that power built on fear always collapses under truth. When people hear the word snitching, they picture street rules, loyalty codes, and survival logic that comes from environments where silence can literally keep you alive. But what we are dealing with here is not the street. And it never has been. What we are dealing with is an industry that deliberately borrowed the language of the street to protect powerful people from accountability, and that is where the confusion begins. That is why a comment like, "the truth will come out, it's not snitching," hits so hard, because it cuts straight through the manipulation and forces people to confront a reality they've been trained to avoid. Cat Williams didn't invent that idea. He didn't even popularize it. He simply said out loud what a lot of men already understand but are afraid to admit. There is a massive difference between snitching to escape responsibility and telling the truth to expose corruption. One is about self-preservation at the expense of others. The other is about refusing to protect systems that thrive on silence. The industry intentionally blurs that line, because as long as men believe telling the truth makes them weak, disloyal, or exposed, the system remains intact. This is why the word snitch gets thrown around so aggressively whenever someone starts pulling back the curtain. It's not about ethics, it's not about rules. It's about intimidation. Labeling someone a snitch is a way to socially isolate them, to discredit them without engaging the facts, and to warn others that speaking up comes with consequences. It's a psychological weapon, not a moral one. And once you recognize that, a lot of reactions suddenly make sense. Men in this industry are taught very early that silence equals survival. Not silence in the sense of dignity or restraint, but silence in the sense of compliance. Don't ask too many questions. Don't repeat what you saw. Don't challenge people who sit higher than you on the ladder. And most importantly, don't ever frame truth as justice, because justice disrupts hierarchy. That lesson is reinforced every time someone who speaks out is mocked, discredited, or attacked personally, instead of being answered factually. This is where masculinity becomes central to the conversation. Men are conditioned to equate strength with stoicism and loyalty with silence. That conditioning is then exploited. When a man knows something damaging about the system, the pressure placed on him is not always overt. It is often subtle, framed as respect, brotherhood, or being solid. He is reminded of what he could lose if he steps out of line, and what he could keep if he stays quiet. Over time, silence starts to feel like honor instead of fear, even when it eats away at him internally. The reason Cat's words resonate is because they flip that conditioning on its head. They suggest that telling the truth is not betrayal, but alignment. Alignment with reality. Alignment with conscience. Alignment with the understanding that protecting wrongdoers does not make you strong, it makes you complicit. That idea is dangerous to an industry built on mutual compromise and shared secrets, because once men stop equating silence with masculinity, the leverage disappears. What we are witnessing right now, especially with the emotional reactions, the public meltdowns, and the frantic attempts to redirect attention, is what happens when silence starts losing its power. When men realize that staying quiet no longer guarantees safety, the system begins to destabilize. The attacks get louder. The accusations get messier. People start shouting snitch, not because the truth is wrong, but because the truth is getting closer. This is why the conversation keeps circling back to humiliation, control, and manhood. When a man's identity is tied to an image of dominance and control, exposure feels like emasculation, even if the truth has nothing to do with sexuality or weakness. It feels like loss of authority. And authority is the real currency here. The industry does not fear gossip. It fears loss of control over narrative. Once men start reclaiming the right to tell their own stories honestly, the hierarchy cracks. Calling someone a snitch is also a way to avoid responsibility. It shifts the focus from what happened to who is talking. It reframes the problem as betrayal instead of wrongdoing. That tactic works as long as people accept the framing. But when more voices start saying, no, that's not snitching, that's truth, the tactic loses effectiveness. You can only shame honesty for so long before people start asking why honesty needs to be shamed in the first place. The deeper conspiracy is not about tapes, rumors, or specific scandals. It is about how silence has been ritualized as a virtue in spaces where it should be a warning sign. Men have been taught that real power is the ability to endure discomfort quietly, even when that discomfort comes from protecting injustice. That lesson benefits the system, not the men inside it. And once men start recognizing that, they begin to question everything they were told about loyalty, strength, and respect. This is also why the truth always comes out eventually. Not because everyone suddenly becomes brave, but because silence has a shelf life. It requires constant reinforcement. It requires fear to stay effective. And fear erodes over time, especially when the consequences of silence start outweighing the consequences of speaking. At some point, telling the truth becomes less dangerous than carrying it. When Cat said the truth will come out, he wasn't making a prediction. He was describing a pattern. Systems built on secrecy eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. The men who survive those collapses are not the ones who screamed loyalty the loudest, but the ones who understood that integrity is not betrayal. That understanding changes how men move, how they speak, and how they respond when the pressure comes. So when people ask whether telling the truth is snitching, the answer is simple if you strip away the manipulation. Snitching protects wrongdoing by redirecting blame. Truth-telling exposes wrongdoing by confronting it directly. One preserves power structures. The other dismantles them. And that is why the industry fights so hard to keep those two things confused. What we are seeing now is not chaos. It is correction. It is the moment when silence starts losing its grip and truth starts reclaiming its authority. And once that shift begins, it does not reverse. Men may resist it. They may lash out. They may try to shame, distract, or intimidate. But history shows the same outcome every time. When truth is no longer treated as betrayal, the system has no defense left. That is why the comment matters. Not because it is clever, but because it names the lie. And once a lie is named, it can no longer operate invisibly. The truth does not need permission to surface. It only needs people willing to stop calling honesty a crime. And that is exactly where this conversation is headed, whether the industry is ready for it or not.